right, everyone. Welcome to Science on Tap. We are really excited to welcome Kyle Sipes. Kyle is a colleague of ours at the Trinity River Restoration Program. He is a river restoration engineer who designs channel rehabilitation projects for Applied River Sciences, which is an organization that works for the Humboldt Valley Tribe. Although, I think if you hang around him for a while, you'll notice that he really likes to wear mushroom logoed hats and t-shirts. And if you hang out with him on any project ever, you'll see him at some point during the day with his nose in the ground looking for mushrooms. And maybe other things. I haven't asked him about that.
Salamanders.
Salamanders, he's looking for salamanders. So his attire might give away his passion, which it is as an avid mushroom enthusiast with over a decade of experience in the forests of Humboldt and Trinity Counties. Kyle was part of a group that refounded the Humboldt State Mycology Club, is part of the group that is a current member of the Humboldt Bay Mycological Society, and hosts the edible mushroom table at the annual Humboldt Mushroom Fair. Tonight, Kyle is going to dive into the forest types of Trinity County and describe the mushrooms that thrive within. So I do recommend getting a pen, maybe taking some notes during this presentation because it'll be helpful. You'll thank yourself later. I am also recording, so we can put it up on our website. And so be aware of that. All right, well, please help me in giving a warm welcome for Kyle Sipes.
Thanks for being here. I'm going to be talking about the mushrooms of Trinity County. So I think I will just jump right into it. So before we go into what's growing on here, I think I wanted to touch a little bit just on the basics of mushrooms for those who may not be super familiar. So the first question is, what is a mushroom? When you hear people say mushroom, we're typically talking about what you see here, your basic fungi that includes a cap, gills, except it's not always gills, sometimes it's pores, we'll get into that later. A stalk. Later in this presentation, you might hear me say the word stipe. Stalk and stipe are the same thing. And then lastly, the underground hyphae, or the actual organism of the mushroom. Mushrooms live underground in this thread-like network, and when we see the mushroom itself, it's actually the fruiting structure of the organism. So you can think of mushrooms akin to the apples on an apple tree, and the hyphae underground is the tree itself. So the basic life cycle of a mushroom, rains happen, your mushroom pops up, it releases its spores. When the spores land in an area that has proper climatic conditions, they will germinate into what's known as hyphae, which are single threads. Two hyphae will come together to form what's called a mycelium. The mycelium is that thread-like network in the ground, and when conditions become right again, they form into fungal knots, which then fruit into your mushrooms. So a little bit about the life histories of mushrooms. That's just kind of how they choose to live. There's kind of three broad groups that I will talk about. One being the mycorrhizal mushrooms. So I'm sure you've heard of that before, maybe. Mycorrhizal mushrooms are living in a symbiotic relationship with their host plant. They are out in the soil column, they are collecting nutrients, they're collecting water, they're pushing it into the plant, and in return, they are getting sugars back from the plant. A lot of our primary edible mushrooms that I'll be talking about are all mycorrhizal, so they grow with specific trees. So a big part you'll see in this presentation is the importance of knowing the trees. Another one is parasites. So this is a mushroom that comes in, gets into an organism, hurts that organism, and sometimes kills it. You'll see this in trees that get killed by things like honey mushrooms. And then last we have our decomposers, or your saprophytes. These are your mushrooms. The white button mushroom you get in a store is a saprophyte. These are just feeding off of decaying and dead organic matter, be it organic matter in the ground, wood of a tree, etc. So next we're going to be talking about kind of our region and the forest communities that make up our region. This is kind of the huge part of mushroom hunting, is kind of learning the forest communities. So yeah, we're going to be talking about Trinity County. Trinity County is a very big place, so I was going to kind of bring it into the Trinity River watershed. A lot of Trinity County is kind of defined by the Trinity River, in my opinion. So basically, if you look at a program called iNaturalist, which is a way of documenting observations of species in the area, on that site alone, we have over 800 species of mushroom-forming fungi in Trinity County. And that's just what's observed. So we have guaranteed probably well over 1,000 species of mushroom-forming fungi that live in Trinity County. So the amount that are out there is kind of mind-boggling. And I don't ever hope to know all of them. I know that's well beyond me. So we're going to talk about, maybe we'll talk about 40 to 50 today. Okay, so we're going to jump right into it. This is kind of structured, starting down at the river and moving up into the mountains. So the big forest community we have here along the rivers is our riparian hardwood forest. These are things like cottonwood trees. Around here in Trinity County, we have black cottonwood and Fremont cottonwood. We also have things like Oregon ash, another very common hardwood tree along the rivers. Everyone probably knows the alder tree. It is probably our most common riparian tree around here. And then lastly, we have our tree willows. Willows are incredibly hard to identify. So I only included the two that I know, which are the two tree species, which is red willow and shiny willow. And to take a quick step back, the reason why I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about the trees here is I always tell people when you want to try to learn to pick mushrooms, forage mushrooms, your first step is to learn the trees. It is vitally important to understand the trees of your forest and landscape if you're going to look for any specific mushroom. Okay, so what do we got in the riparian forest? Probably the most famous one is our yellow morel or Morchella americana. This is a prized edible species that occurs throughout the United States. They're way more common east of the Rockies. I'm sure there's pictures of people with truck beds full of these things. They're a lot less common west of the Rockies, but they do occur along these riparian hardwood bands. They like to grow with cottonwood and Oregon ash here in Trinity County. They also occur in older apple orchards. So if any of you have any apple trees in your yard, it's definitely worth walking around them in spring. They have a hollow stem connecting to the bottom of the cap and kind of have that honeycomb cap that morels are famous for. They also like a little bit of disturbance. So when you're going to the rivers, if you find areas that maybe have flooded a year prior, or some trees have fallen over, or a cottonwood recently died, that's going to be the area you're going to want to look for. The next pictures, these are some I had found around the area. And I wanted to point out here, this is an example of the hollow stem. And you can see here where the stem actually connects to the bottom of the cap and does not run up into it. Identifying morels compared to any of their lookalikes is this hollowness is going to be one of your main indicators. If you've never had a morel before, they're freaking delicious, and I highly suggest it. And Trinity County in particular, we're going to get to this a little bit later, but it is there's so many different species of morels here that can be found throughout the year. And then, here we go. So these are some other morels that also grow with cottonwoods and ash along the riparian corridor. There's a whole variety of black morels. This is a really cool one, Morchella populophylla. Populophylla means populace loving, growing with cottonwood. These are some other ones. I don't know what species these are, but I found these growing with cottonwoods. This one was here just down the road. This one was along the Sacramento River in Shasta. And then these ones were kind of disturbance morels actually growing on one of the channel rehab projects that the Trinity River Restoration Program had done, the Chapman Ranch project. I included the picture with the soil thermometer because the soil thermometer could be a great tool for finding morels. Morels often will not fruit until your soil temperatures are above 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So this is particularly useful when you're looking for more your mountain morels up in the Trinities. If you go into an area, you think it's looking good, the snow is gone, but then you stick your thermometer in, the soil temperature is only 42 degrees, you probably want to go down in elevation until you find stuff above 50 degrees. So the next one I want to talk about is the field cap. This is another really common riparian species that grows in grassy areas under cottonwoods. It fruits earlier than yellow morels. So I included this because this species is a great thing to look for if you're going out along the rivers to try to find yellow morels. You come to a spot, it looks right, you just see field caps everywhere. It's a sign that you might be a couple weeks too early. It's a sign that you could be in the right spot, but try coming back in like two weeks. They're also edible themselves, but I heard they're not very good. They taste like mud, I've been told. I have not eaten it myself, but if you like mud, go for it. And yeah, lastly, they're a decomposer of the organic material, so they're not necessarily growing specifically with any tree, they're just eating all the good stuff in the ground. Another example of an early indicator, which is a lot better, is the thimble cap, or Verpa bohemica. So this species is actually a cousin of the morel. It's in the same family as morels are, but like the field caps before it, it's another sign that you're in the right area, but you might just be a couple weeks too early. Unlike the other one, this is a wonderful edible. I think it is as good as any morel I've tried. So if you find these, don't get bummed, get stoked. Some of the differences between these and true morels is a wrinkled cap instead of that honeycombed cap that I showed earlier. And the big giveaway is the stem. So as I showed earlier, the stem of the morel was hollow and attached to the bottom of the cap. The thimble cap has a pith-filled stem that goes all the way up to the top of the cap. So that's going to be your important indicator for telling these apart from true morels. Probably one of the more common things you'll see along the river throughout the year is the oyster mushroom, which I'm sure many of you know. It is probably the most widely cultivated wild mushroom. It grows on hardwood, so you're going to find this. You could find this on ash, willow, alder, cottonwoods. Any of those trees I mentioned earlier all could be potential hosts for this species. An important thing to know is the gills of this mushroom run all the way down its stem, and it's going to be growing off the tree. There are several species in California. Our understanding of the species of this genus is not super well, but one we do have around here that we do know is the Pleurotus populinus. Once again, populinus, populus, growing on cottonwoods. And this one has not really many dangerous lookalikes, so it's a great mushroom for beginners when you're just starting to learn. And the last one I wanted to mention was the honey mushroom, or the armillaria species. This is a parasitic mushroom. So if you find this growing, it probably means the tree it's growing on is going to be dead soon. Unfortunately, it's a strong killer of a lot of trees. It grows in big clusters at the base. It has gills that run slightly down the stem, not like an oyster, but just at the bottom of it. Huh? Turn it up, huh? Okay. And also, they have a prominent skirt on the stipe. So this is called an annulus. And yeah, it's just basically a ring on the stem. One thing to know about this mushroom is it is edible, but it needs to be cooked really well. If you undercook this mushroom, it can make you sick. So it's something to be aware of. Typically, if you boil it for 5 minutes and then cook it until crispy in a pan, you're going to be fine. But be aware. So kind of moving away from the rivers now, we're starting to kind of head up the slopes. Our next kind of forest type we're going to encounter is our low elevation mixed conifer hardwood woodland. This is probably going to be the most common forest type that's easily accessible around here, at least one of the two. So trees that make up this forest type, the most famous and most common one is going to be your Douglas fir. It's probably the most abundant conifer in California due to logging land foresting practices. And you can tell it apart from other conifers by its cone that has these bracts that stick out from the scales. They're very, very distinct and unique to this type of tree. Another one that is common, more common in western Trinity County, but it's the tan oak tree. This is not a true oak, it's a close relative. Like I said, it's primarily in western Trinity County, but there is populations of it up by Coffee Creek. So that's going to be a place. I'm going to have a couple mushrooms in this section that grow with tan oak. So coffee, if you're not trying to go west, Coffee Creek area might be the place to look. One of my favorite trees, I think, is the madrone tree. I love it because it kind of looks like it belongs in a tropical forest rather than a conifer forest in Northern California. It's really unique by its peely bark and its smooth underbark. And yeah, it's a really great tree. It has a bunch of cool things that grow with it that we'll get into a little bit later. The pines of our lowland forest is probably the ponderosa pine. It's kind of got your classic pine cone shape. It's really common here in the valley. And then the last one we have is our gray pine, another extremely common tree here in the valley. It has probably the biggest pine cones. That one's even relatively a small one. They can get freaking huge, football sized. It's another other really cool thing about the gray pine is it has edible pine nuts that are really delicious. And if you just chuck it as hard as you can at the ground, you can get the pine nuts out. So good to know that tree. I actually don't really know too many mushrooms that grow with this tree in particular, but the pine nuts are really cool. So I wanted to include it. Okay, so going into the mushrooms of this part of the woods, probably your most common widely eaten edible one is going to be your chanterelles. Around here, your orange ones are going to be Cantharellus cascadensis. These grow in a symbiotic relationship with Douglas fir and true firs. It has ridges or false gills. So, So false gills are those kind of little ridges that run on the surface of the mushroom, running down the stipe. And they're different. They're less blade-like than true gills. So that's kind of the main thing you need to learn when doing chanterelles. But once you kind of get the eye for it, it's very obvious of what it is. It's a prized edible mushroom. I love making gravy with this one. I love deep frying it. I love all kinds of things with it. And one thing to note about our orange chanterelles is we do have one poisonous lookalike that you need to be aware of, and that is the jack-o'-lantern mushroom. The jack-o'-lantern mushroom is freaking gorgeous, but it will make you very, very sick. It is different from chanterelles, and you can tell it apart in a lot of ways. One, it's going to be growing at the base of oak trees, growing out of the wood itself. Chanterelles will grow out of the ground, not out of the wood. It has true gills. So like I said earlier, it's kind of more blade-like structures, less like ridges on the surface of the mushroom. Another way to tell it apart from chanterelles is if you cut it in half, the flesh of the jack-o'-lantern will be orange all the way through, while the flesh of the chanterelle will be orange on the outside, but white on the inside. So if you learn those things, it's pretty easy to tell this apart once you kind of get used to it. So another chanterelle you guys will have out here is the white chanterelle, Cantharellus subalbidus. It is a mycorrhizal associate with Douglas fir and tan oak. Like the other chanterelle, it has ridges that run down the stem, not true gills. This one grows from early fall to early winter. It really likes it when we get kind of years like this, when we get a lot of early season rains before it gets too cold. I find that to be a big part of this having a good year is the early rains. And like all other chanterelles, it's a prized edible. It's really great for eating if you catch it before it's waterlogged. This one will get really soggy really fast when it rains. So at that point, it's better to make salt out of. So we're kind of going into our boletes now. This is the queen bolete. It's a relative of the king bolete. All these royal boletes, or whatever you want to call them, are part of the Porcini family. This one is a mycorrhizal associate with tan oak as well as true oaks. It has a whitish bloom on the cap when young. And it also has prominent netting or reticulation on the stem. And that's what you're seeing here. It kind of looks like you took a fishing net and wrapped it around the stem of the mushroom. This is a very important feature for identification of boletes. And a lot of our edible boletes, well, not a lot, a couple of the main ones will have this net-like feature. It grows from early fall to late fall. It's a shorter season. And this one in particular really depends on those early season rains. So when we get those seasons where we get good amounts of rain in September and October, that's when I'll go out looking for this type of mushroom. When we haven't really gotten our rains, and when they hold off till November, this is typically not going to have a great year. And you'll find that with a lot of mushrooms. Early season rains before it gets cold are just the best. It gives you years like this. And yeah, it's also a prized edible. It's really great eating. One of the really fun ones is chicken of the woods. This is a neon orange polypore that grows off trees. You will often see it from 50 yards away, like a freaking fire on a tree in the distance. It's super beautiful. We have two species in California, Laetoporus conifercola and Laetoporus gilbertsonii. Like its name suggests, Laetoporus conifercola grows on conifers, And your primary host here in Trinity County are going to be Douglas fir and true fir. Our other species we have is Laetoporus gilbertsonii. Its name doesn't really tell you anything about what it grows on. It doesn't grow on Gilberts or whatever. This one grows on hardwood trees. So down here in the valley, you're probably going to see this one more commonly, because you'll find it growing on oak trees in the oak woodland. So your black oaks, your white oaks, your live oaks, things like that. One thing to note about this one, like the honey mushroom, this one's even worse. It must be well cooked. If you undercook it, it is known to make people extremely sick, like throwing up the rest of the night sick. That being said, it's pretty easy to well cook enough. I typically will boil it for 10 minutes, pour off the water, dry it out, and then cook it however I'm going to cook it, be it that pan saute, deep fried to make a buffalo chicken sandwich, or things like that. This mushroom, it doesn't taste like chicken, but its texture is very similar to chicken breast meat. It's kind of wild. Its texture is so much like meat, it's kind of mind-blowing. But cook the hell out of it. Don't eat it undercooked. Keep on going. So we have our Dyer's polypore. This one's not an edible one, but it's a very cool mushroom. It grows on the roots. It's a root decomposer of conifer trees. So you'll see it on things like Doug firs, true firs, pines. You can tell it by the rings in its growth. It's kind of gold to brown colors. And it's used to dye natural fibers, a whole range of colors. As you can see here, all this different yarn was all dyed from this mushroom. The dyes you need typically animal fibers, things like wool, silk, but it also takes the cotton, but it won't take to any sort of artificial fibers. So yeah, just a cool mushroom I wanted to bring up. So kind of moving into gilled mushrooms, all the mushrooms I've said so far don't really have gills. They have the false gills. They have pores. They're either a smooth surface polypore. But there's a lot of gilled mushrooms that are perfectly edible as well. A lot of the really good ones have gills. When you kind of start stepping into gilled mushrooms, you're stepping closer to some of the more dangerous mushrooms. So gilled mushrooms aren't really for beginners, but it's not hard to learn over time. So one I wanted to highlight was the shrimp russula, or Russa olympiana. This is a very common mushroom of the Douglas fir and other conifer forest. It smells like shellfish when it's old. When it's really old, it smells like rotting fish. It's disgusting. When it's young, it's kind of a nice, pleasant, seafood bisque type smell. Ways to tell this one from other russulas and other gilled mushrooms is it can have a large range of cotton cap color that can range from brick red to purple. I've seen it more often on the purple side than the brick red side. It will have a purplish blush on the stem. It doesn't really come out super great in this photo, but on the stem of this mushroom, there'll be purple blotches. And it'll have a mild taste, not acrid. The term acrid means it's gonna burn your tongue. So one of the ways people identify different russulas is you actually bite a little piece of the mushroom, you chew it up, and you let it sit on the tip of your tongue. Over about 30 seconds, sometimes your tongue will start burning as if you have chilies or pepper on your tongue. At that point, you spit it out. Do note that you have to ingest a mushroom for it to harm you. You could even take a death cap and chew on it a little bit and spit it out, and you would be fine. I don't suggest doing that, but you would be fine if you did it. So I bring it up because a lot of people freak out when I'm taking them in the woods and I grab a mushroom off the ground and I take a bite out of it. They freak out, and it's not as weird of a thing as it might seem. But the last big indicator for this one that kind of tells it apart from other purple russulas is its stem will stain yellow ochre when you scratch it, and that color will fade to brown over about a minute. And that puts you into the shrimp russula group. And if you have that, plus it's not burning your tongue, you're pretty much safe to eat a russula. A russula you are not safe to eat is the almond-scented russula. So this is another really common one in the Doug fir forest. It can get huge. I've seen them the size of dinner plates. And what's really unique about this one is it smells a strong smell of like almond extract or marzipan. It smells really good. Sometimes it's very intense and it's too much, but it's one of those ones where you smell it and you're like, oh, this is food, I could eat this, but you actually cannot. This one is poisonous and will make you sick if you eat it. So one of the big ones, these are growing right now this time of year. They like to grow from December to March, is the black trumpet mushroom, or Craterellus calicornicopoides. It is primarily mycorrhizal with tan oak, but can also occur with live oak and black oak. So it's like some of the other ones. This is probably going to be more common in western Trinity County, where the tan oaks are more prominent. It's a great edible. It's probably in my top 3 favorite edibles there are. It's having an amazing year this year. If you can get out, if you can go west to like the Burnt Ranch area, you're very likely to find this one right now. I brought up earlier the population of tan oaks up by Coffee Creek. Oftentimes with mushrooms, where there's the tree they like, there's also them. So I would highly suggest going up to Coffee Creek, finding that population of tan oaks and looking for these there. People haven't really done that before, and it'd be a really cool thing if you could find them. And lastly, they have a smooth surface. So there's no gills, no false gills, nothing like that. It's just smooth, and they have to me, it smells fruity, but I've had a lot of friends say that it smells like blue cheese to them, which those two smells don't really seem like they go together, but so yeah, I highly suggest getting out, go check Coffee Creek, find them, let me know, because I would think it's really cool if you could find them up there. And the last one I want to talk about for this forest type is another morel. This one is called Morchella tridentina. It likes to grow with madrone trees in spring in the lowland forest, and with true fir kind of later into spring, early summer in the higher alpine or subalpine forest. It's freaking delicious. It's a really great one. And what's a really cool thing about this one is it's blonde in color, but genetically it's actually a black morel. So this is more closely related to the black bird morels you find in the mountains than the blonde morel you find in the rivers. So really unique, cool thing about that. So going into our next one, this is the oak woodlands. This is going to be your other really common tree of the lowland forest, or forest of the lowland areas. Oak woodlands are freaking beautiful. I love going out there any chance I get. Our most common one around here is probably the white oak, or Quercus garryana. And then our second most common is probably the black oak, or Quercus colagii. You can tell black oaks apart from white oaks. They have kind of darker bark. They have pointier leaves and a shaggier cap. And I think one of the coolest things about black oaks is you go out in spring and all their new growth is red magenta color. So you'll see trees that are just, it's kind of like the fall colors, but it's in spring. Also, for a lot of the species I'm going to talk about, the black oaks are kind of your heavy hitters for being their associate. A lot of these mushrooms I will mention specifically like the black oaks and will also grow with the white oaks when they're around. So learning the black oak tree for the oak woodland is probably your biggest first step into picking mushrooms in the oak woodland. Another one I wanted to mention, because you guys have a population of them here, is the blue oak, or Quercus douglasii. In all honesty, I can't really speak to the mushrooms that grow with blue oaks because I don't have much experience with them. I think here in Trinity County is probably their western limit. They're a lot more common going east into the Central Valley. But it's a super cool tree, and they do grow around here, so I suggest going and saying hello. So what mushrooms grow with oak trees? This one is probably going to be the most common mushroom you're going to see in the oak forest. They are everywhere. They're called Gymnopus dryophilus. Dryophilus is a Latin way of saying oak loving. So these mushrooms love growing with oaks. You'll see them by the hundreds while you're out there. And so many times for me, I'm trying to find butter boletes or chanterelles or something cool, and all I'll see all day are these little guys. They are edible, but they're not commonly eaten because they're small. They can be hard to identify if you don't really know what you're doing. And they begin fruiting in early fall. They can be a good sign, you are in an oak area where mushrooms are growing. So if you come across them, don't lose hope. there's probably cooler things at the next tree. And if not that tree, probably at the next tree. So my favorite thing of the oak woodlands is the butter bolete. These were recently reclassified in their own genus by David Aurora and Jonathan Frank, and they did a really funny thing where they named it Butteriboletus. So the butter boletes are Butteriboletus. So yeah, like I said, these like to fruit with white and black oaks in early fall after early season warm rains. I've mentioned this at least 3 times already. It's that early season, early rains that really kicks this into gear. These do not occur every year. From what I've seen in the 12 years I've been doing this, they seem to have a really solid season about every 3 or 4 years. And it basically always aligns with when we get that mid to late September, early October rains. And typically if you can get 2 inches of rain before mid-October, that's when I go and look for these things. Like the queen I showed earlier, you can't really see it in these pictures super well, but they're also gonna have that reticulation, that netting, that fishnet type thing on their stipe. You can see it a little bit right there. It's not as prominent as kings or queens, but it is there. As their name implies, the butter comes from the bright yellow stem and bright yellow gills. They also bruise blue on the pore surface, as you can see on this one, and they begin fruiting in early fall. Around here, you're probably going to have two primary species. There's 5 that grow in California. In all honesty, you probably could find all 5 growing around here, but the 2 really common ones you'll see in the oak woodlands is called the brown-capped butter bolete, Butteriboletus persilitis, and kind of the red-capped butter bolete, which is these ones right here, Butteriboletus quercy-regius. And then I just included this one because that picture, it looks like, like the fake frosting stuff they put on cakes? That looks like that to me. It looks like a mushroom cake. So what are boletes you should not eat? Most boletes in general, and I should take a step back. Boletes are defined by, they have pores instead of gills. So there's a whole mess of species that are in the bolete family. They all have pores. Most of them are edible. One of the rules that people give when people are just starting off is a bolete is edible unless it is red or bruises blue. That's a good rule of thumb to go by if you want to be extra safe. But as I pointed out, if you do follow that rule, you're not going to have butter boletes because they do bruise blue. So it's a rule to learn. It's not a hard rule. There's also, on the East Coast, there's a species of mushroom called Exudoporus frostii. It's a really delicious edible. It is bright red and bruises deep blue. So one that is bright red and bruises deep blue that you should not eat is the oak Satan bolete, or Riparian eastwoodii. These things are freaking gorgeous. They're probably one of the prettiest mushrooms you'll come across in the oak woodland. They're defined by their red, kind of red to pinkish color. They have a red to kind of yellowish pore surface. They have this big bulbous stipe, and then they bruise completely blue when you bisect it. Butter boletes will only bruise blue on the pore surface. If I was to cut this in half, the bisection would not bruise blue, versus your Satan boletes, when you cut it in half, that whole thing is going to bruise blue. This is a very toxic mushroom. It'll make you extremely sick if you eat it, and it has at least 1 confirmed death in the United States. It'll fruit under oaks at the same time as butter boletes. So this is an important one to be aware of if you're picking butters. It looks drastically different, but it is important to know. It also has that reticulation or netting on the stem, and it begins fruiting in early fall. So this is, in terms of poisonous ones out in the oak woodlands, this is going to be probably one of your major ones. Another bolete of the oak woodlands is the bitter bolete, or Caloboletus marshii. This is a cool bolete. It is non-toxic but very bitter. So a lot of reference books you'll see, they'll say not to eat it, but people eat bitter melon. So if you like eating bitter stuff, like you could eat this. I have a friend on the coast who will collect bitter boletes. He sugars them to make cocktail bitters. So there's cool stuff you can do with them. It won't make you sick if you accidentally eat it. You'll probably just spit it out. It kind of has a whitish, so it can range from like white to brownish cap. It has a yellow porous surface and stem. This one will be smooth, so that reticulation that I've been mentioning a couple times, that netting, that's not going to be present on this species. And then like the Satan bolete, it will bruise completely blue when you bisect it. And I bring this up because it's another common bolete of the oak woodlands. You'll probably come across it if you're out looking for butters. One thing to note is the bitter bolete seems to fruit slightly earlier than butters. So if I'm out there and it's too early for butters, I'll typically see a lot of bitters, and I'll know that, one, because these also kind of need that early rain. So this will tell me that, like, one, this year is a go, I can expect butters this year, and two, I should probably come back next week or in 2 weeks. So this is a good one to know if you're trying to read the landscape. So another edible mushroom this one is not for beginners, but I wanted to show it to you all. This is called the spring cocora, or Amanita verticocora. It's an edible species of Amanita. I'm sure you all have been seeing all the stuff in the news this year that death caps are having a crazy year and killing people. Death caps are also an Amanita. Death caps look freaking a lot like this mushroom. So it's not for beginners, but it can be learned after time. I probably was picking mushrooms for 7 to 8 years before I started messing with these. But once you learn what to look for, you can tell what they are. So these fruit with black oaks and Douglas fir in the spring. It's going to have a hollow stipe. So if I cut this in half, there's going to be a pithy material in the stipe that you can kind of scratch it out. Or if I was to cut it along the stem, it would look like a calamari ring. Other things, it has a patch of universal remnant on the top of the cap. So all amanitas start their life as eggs. And as they get older, they kind of hatch from their egg. And when they're fully grown, they still have remnants of that egg on the top of their cap and at the bottom of the stem. So these will typically have a thick, fluffy remnant of that at the top of their cap, when the deadly ones will not. They have what is known as a striate margin. And when I say striate margin, if you look at this one, it shows it pretty good. It's all those little lines on the edge of the cap. Particularly, you'll see it even when they're very young. The death caps, the dangerous mushrooms, will not have that when they're young. They can show it when they're old, though. Another thing is a V-shaped vulva remnant at the base. So I think you can see here, it's generally V-shaped or triangular. That's another giveaway of the cocora, or this section of Amanita. And they have a bright yellow cap. Some people love the flavor of this mushroom. It used to be very famous that Italians really loved it. It was used in a lot of Italian recipes. Some people hate this flavor. So, it's probably, you can weigh the options if it's worth trying it. I remember the first time I ever found, it was kind of a cousin species to this, the fall cocora. I had been identifying it for years, finally worked up the bravery to try to eat it. Me and my girlfriend at the time, we got all stoked. We cooked up this big meal, sat down to eat it, super stoked. I took one bite and thought it was absolutely disgusting, and we had to get pizza instead. So, but if you're gonna ever think about some of these, you really need to understand our next mushroom. This is the destroying angel, or Amanita ocreata. This mushroom will kill you if you eat a single one of them. It's a close relative of the death cap that's been grows throughout California, has been in the news a lot recently. This is deadly poisonous. It's full of amatoxins, which basically cause liver failure. It's a really horrible way to die. And it also will grow alongside edible amanitas in the oak woodlands. So that's why it's very important to understand the differences between the two if you're going to consider eating them. Ways you can tell them apart. This one does not have a hollow stipe. If you cut that in half, It's going to be a solid stem all the way through, except for sometimes it has hollow bits. It typically lacks the universal rail on top, except when it does have it. When it does have it, it's super paper thin, not cottony. It will have a getting ahead of myself. It will have a non-striate margin, meaning it does not have those little lines, except when it gets older and it does have those little lines. Probably the biggest way to tell them apart, that's the thing about about Amanitas is it follows this rule except for when it doesn't. It follows that rule except for when it doesn't. So when you're identifying Amanitas, you need to make sure it checks this, and this before you ever consider eating it. Big difference between this one and the spring cocora is kind of the more sac-shaped vulva remnant at the bottom, and bulbous stipe. So the stipe comes down and it gets bulbous, whereas the stipe of this one tapers to a point. Yeah, and it's typically white, can have kind of a salmon pinkish blush to the cap. And the screwed up part is people that have eaten this and survived it said it tasted really good. So I hope none of us ever have that experience. So kind of moving into the final forest type around here, and probably, I mean, one of my favorites. I'm sure you've all been up in the Alps. It's freaking magical up there. And it's dominated by our high elevation conifer forest. These are photos from the Long Valley area and the Ironside Mountain area. Probably your main tree up there is going to be your white fir, Abies color. Super unique by their cones that stand up at the top of the tree. You kind of need binoculars to actually see them. But your white fir is going to be your kind of heavy hitter for all these edible species that we're going to talk about. Alongside that is going to be your Shasta red fir. These are typically a little bit higher elevation than the white fir, but they also are the heavy hitter in terms of hosting edible mushrooms. So learning to identify true fir trees is going to be your first big step into picking morels in the mountains, or any mushrooms in the mountains, really. Something else that's up there is your sugar pine. I'm sure you've all seen sugar pines. They have these crazy huge cones. They do this to me, it always looks like a ballerina dancer, you know? Just another really cool tree up in the high elevations that I wanted to include. So up in the mountains, it's all about morels. It's kind of one of the big heavy hitters here in Trinity County. There's so many species I can think of. There's at least 5 or 6 that grow up in the mountains here. They range in all kinds of different colors, from just, typical brown to more lighter, to gray, to pink, to green. These are just some examples of various morels. These ones are more Chalisnideri. These are kind of more, they're not really closely associated with fires. And then we also have our burn morels that are extremely associated with fire. So learning this fire relationship with morels is going to be your big key to picking these things. It's kind of really hard to learn. I've been doing it for 10 years and I still barely know what the hell I'm doing. But burn morels, as I was saying, they're a product of fire and water. That water could be rain. It is most often snow in the forest. So what do I mean when I say a product of fire and water? A lot of these burn morels always follow a fire, be it maybe prescribed, maybe wildfire, in conifer forest. And it also is a function of the snow. Depending on how late in the year, when has the snow melted? The fire kind of sets up the condition for the morels to grow, and then the snow provides them the water that they want. So these fruit in spring to midsummer, depending on, you can typically start picking them in mid-May, and you can chase them up slope until August. They like to grow in the first or second years following a fire. They're not common in high-intensity burns. So if you come into a burn area and all the trees are toothpicks, the ground is just burned away, there's no duff, that's probably not the place you want to look for burn morels. You really want to look for forests that kind of look like this. So this is a kind of mild to medium severity. You have a mixed, there's still needles on the trees may be dead, but you have a mix of dead trees and alive trees. And you have a very thick, well, not very thick, but you have there's a needle coverage on the ground. take a picture of this view in your head. When I go burn morel hunting now, I look for forest that looks like this. It took me about 7 years to figure out that I need to look for forest like this. But this is a huge thing. As I was saying, it's a pain in the ass to figure out location and timing. One thing to note, burn morels will occur with any conifer tree, but they specifically like burned true fir. So if you know an area where there was a fire last summer and it burned through a fir forest, you're going to want to go there, probably starting in early May, and keeping your eyes on that area, looking for tree landscapes like this. And a really great indicator species for burn morels is these small yellow cup fungi that grow all over the ground. They're super tiny. But typically, if I go to an area, if I see these small yellow cups, I know there's going to be burn morels there. There's at least 4 to 6 different species of burn morels. They're extremely difficult to tell apart. Some of them require either microscopes or DNA sequencing. And this is kind of what I was saying earlier. They have all different ranges of colors. These are your typical brown ones. These ones kind of show a little bit of hint of greenish tint. Commercial pickers call these pickles. Weird name. Sometimes they have a bit of a pinkish color. These get called pinkies. And sometimes they're just kind of more of a light tan. Some people think these color differences might be an indicator of if it's a different species or not. But really, you know, up there you can call them they're all conical-clad burn morels. You don't really need to worry about the species of them. Your species composition changes as the season progresses and years go by. So in the first year after a fire, in June, you're going to see a certain swath of species, typically these ones. If you go back to that same fire in later July to August, there's another species of burn morel that shows up called Morchella tomentosa, or the gray fuzzyfoot morel. It is famous for liking to grow later in the summer. And as the years go by, you know, typically these morels kind of start petering off after the first to second year. But as the years go by and you kind of get into year 3, year 4, you start seeing flushes of Morchella snyderi. And Morchella snyderi is a black morel. It's my favorite morel to eat. I think it's way more flavorful, way more delicious than the burn morels. It occurs in undisturbed true fir forest. A great place to go pick this species is out by Mount Shasta. The fir forests of Mount Shasta are loaded with these things in spring. But as I was just saying, they also like to occur in several-year-old burns. So if that burn is 3 to 4, 5 years old, that's when this species is starting to show up. And yes, they occur throughout the Trinities, throughout the Marbles, out to Mount Shasta. This is probably my favorite morel to eat. It's really great. And I know for a fact it grows around here in the Trinities. So this is definitely one to keep your eyes out for. So I'll use this moment to kind of talk about the game with picking in the mountains. So picking in the mountains is a game about chasing elevation. These species are related to how long ago the snow was there. So, you know, typically starting in May, your snow is going to recede. You get a swath of species that like to show up right after the snow is there. I actually didn't include I forgot to include my favorite in this one. My favorite is called Gyromiter montana. It's a look-alike of this of morels, kind of. I highly suggest looking that one up when you get a chance. If you come and talk to me afterwards, I have a book right here that I can show you pictures of it in, but it's delicious. But anyways, that'll follow. So like you see that one, that's about a week after the snow has receded. About 2 weeks after the snow has receded is when you start seeing Morchella snyderi. Those will grow for a couple weeks and start to dry off. About 2 weeks after Morchella snyderi, you'll start seeing spring kings, or Boletus rexvaris. This is a relative of the queen bolete I mentioned earlier, of the king boletes out on the coast. It has pores instead of gills. Like I said, it comes about 2 weeks after the morel flush. It often grows in shrumps, and what a shrump is you'll be walking through the forest, you'll see a bump on the ground, and you'll be like, hey, that looks weird. And you dig up the bump, and there'll be a mushroom underneath it. So these often are growing like that. Not as good as the fall porcini, but still an excellent edible, and sometimes, as you can see here, they can be quite abundant. So tying this back to that elevation game I was talking about. Say I am going out and I really want to find morels. That's what I'm going for that day. I pick a spot, I get out, I see spring kings. What that tells me, if I'm seeing spring kings as an area, I know that these grow about 2 weeks after the morels, right? So this tells me that I now need to get back in my car and go up elevation about another 500 feet if I want to look for morels. So it's important to keep that in. If you're playing the mountain game, I highly suggest getting an altimeter app, just an app on your phone that tells you your altitude. That way you can track how far you're going up in elevation, how far you're going down in elevation. So yeah, there's another one that comes in about 2 more weeks after the spring king, and it's the spring butters. These are a great mushroom. They also have pores, they have reticulation. It's that same relationship. These kind of grow about 2 weeks after the porcini flush happens. So if you're looking for these and you come across spring kings, you need to go back down in elevation. If you're looking for morels and you find these, you need to go fairly significant way up in elevation. Like the other butters, they bruise blue. They grow in spring. They have a reddish cap, so if you follow that, don't eat a red bolete that bruises blue, you're never gonna try these. They're probably one of my favorite edible boletes. They have a crazy, wonderful texture that holds up to deep cooking, and they take on a lot of great flavors. So this is a really fun one to learn. If you can't find them here, go out to Shasta. These last 3 species I mentioned love Mount Shasta. They grow in prolific abundance out there. They're a little bit harder to get to around here, but they are out here. So basically everything I've talked about so far has been spring mushrooms up in the high alpine forest, but I wanted to include this one because it's not spring. This one grows in fall. This time of year might be good. It's getting a little late in the season, but since it's been a warmer year, it might be worth it. This is called bear's head. You probably have heard of its cousin, the lion's mane. That's a commonly grown mushroom. You can get it in stores now. This has all the same characteristics of the lion's mane. It grows a little bit branchier than the lion's mane, but it's just as good, tastes like crab. Maybe it does good stuff for your brain, maybe not. And I look for this one in, as I've said a million times now, in the years with the early rains. And I look for this between October and November or before snowfall. And sometimes you can find a bunch and you can make a bunch of really happy people. This day, we picked it, as you can tell, we picked this in the snow, and it was probably one of my favorite mushroom hunting days. Picking mushrooms in the snow felt freaking incredible. So I highly suggest getting out there for that. So yeah, so that's gonna be the end of the actual mushrooms I'll talk about, but I wanted to have a little bit here at the end on what can mushrooms and foraging teach us. Primarily, the big one is nature's freaking beautiful, and it's a powerful teacher. Getting into mushrooms opened my eyes to the broader landscape of nature. After learning mushrooms, I started learning the flowers, I started learning the amphibians. You start looking closer at things you may not have looked at before, and you start to see a lot of things. And once you kind of catch the eye for it, it makes going outside just way more fun. Another part is, humans have a responsibility to protect and enhance our landscape. And what does this mean? It means, just cherishing what we have, trying to protect it, doing things that might help it. Selective logging of Doug fir forest might be an example. Prescribed burning might be an example. Stuff like that, I think, really important to kind of break away from that kind of John Muir-esque view of nature as a cathedral, something that is separate from humans. That is an old, outdated concept. Humans have always been part of nature. Humans have played a big role in the nature. The indigenous people of this area helped curate our landscape, and we see a lot of the beauty here because of their actions. So it's important to kind of keep that in mind. And on that note, I just want to say a special thank you to the nations who helped create the landscapes we love. I think it's important to show respect to the people that came here before, being the Nor'el Mikwintu, the Wintu tribes, Cayuse, Umatilla, Walla Walla, Sununwe, and Chumariko. These people helped create the landscapes that we get our mushrooms from and we get all these beautiful things from. And it's important to show respect, and if we can, help reconnect them back to the landscape. So at that point, I can take questions if we have time for that, or you can come talk to me at the table. Or yeah, that's all.